Bob Lorenz, Jack Curry, Meredith Marakovitz, and right out of the gate, joined by the manager of the Yankees, Joe Girardi. Always good to see you. Joe, let's talk about your mindset right now. You get to the playoffs last year, that's good, but it's one and done in that first game. It's so sudden. Does something like that linger with you a little bit?
Oh, it's really difficult because you do everything to protect from getting to that one-game series, and we weren't able to hold off Toronto, and it was disappointing. And it was really hard. And someone asked me, how long does it take you to decompress? Well, it really starts after the playoffs are over, because I'm still upset as I'm watching other teams play, because you really want to be there and your goal is to win the World Series. So it takes some time.
Joe, when you look at the roster that you have assembled right now, I know you'd probably say, I'll take this team into 2016. But if you were allowed to have a wish list, where do you see your needs? What are some of the things as a manager you'd love to add?
Well, I think that your biggest concern every year going into spring training is your rotation. And you know, we have some guys that are coming off injuries, and that's a concern. Those are things that you worry about. Shoring up the infield defense is something that is a concern of ours and that we need to worry about. But the big thing is having guys have the years that they're capable of having. And if we do that, we feel good about our team.
You talk about the rotation and some of those guys coming off of injuries. Nathan Eovaldi pitched very well until he got injured. Also, Masahiro Tanaka off-season surgery. What's the status on those guys? Any concern that some of those issues can linger into next season?
Well, there's always a little bit of concern until you actually see him throw, until you get into games in spring training and you realize, you know what, he's healthy, he's ready to go. So I saw Tanaka about 3 or 4 days ago. He looked good. His rehab was going well. Nathan Eovaldi's rehab is going well. You know, he doesn't have any issues at this time. But until you get him on a mound, you see him really pitch, you don't feel 100% sure that they're all the way back.
Do you have a feel and expectations for what Luis Severino can do in year two? He came up very impressive, very calm and cool customer.
Well, I think he's only going to get better. I think his location is going to get better. I think his secondary pitches will continue to improve. But the thing that you have to guard against as a second-year player, you have to guard against people that expect you to be perfect and do really well and to have a big sophomore season. And you have to make sure that you prepare and do all the same things that you did before and just work on getting better. Continue to master your trade. And if you do that and don't take things for granted, I think you'll be fine.
Joe, sticking with the rotation, we all know how CC Sabathia's season ended, wasn't part of the wild card game. Have you had conversations with CC? How is he doing, and what are your expectations for him?
No, I've seen him a couple times, and I've had conversations. He's doing well. I've seen him at the ballpark working out with the strength coaches and working out with their trainers and getting ready for 2016. I think he's in a good frame of mind. I really think he did the right thing. And, you know, he pitched really well the month leading up to him deciding to do what he did. And I think the knee brace really helped, and we expect him to be able to make, 30 starts for us next year.
You look at Adam Warren, he's had several roles for you. He's done both of them well. Where do you see him fitting in 2016?
He's the one guy that can do everything for us, and he had a great year last year for us. So we'll have to see how that fits as we move forward and go through spring training.
With him, you kind of had to worry about the innings a little bit towards the end of last season because he pitched extra innings. Is that going to be an issue in the event that he is in that rotation?
No, I think that, you could pretty much turn him loose at this point, to give him 175 innings. You could turn him loose because of what he did last year.
Is there any sort of specific offseason plan for Jacoby Ellsbury and Brett Gardner in terms of Ellsbury had some injuries and kept him out of games. Gardner had some probably undisclosed injuries, but he stayed on the field and played in games. But you got to find a way to keep him healthy and then productive in the second half.
Yeah, I think that Hicks is really going to help us with that, because I think Hicks is, he's going to play. He can play left, he can play center, he can play right, and I think that you get into a rotation where maybe you don't have to play the guys quite as much. I think a lot of Jacoby's problems stem from his knee, and he came back and. Maybe he favored it a little bit. Even though he was healthy, I think there's in the back of your mind, I'm a little bit worried about it. And I think he'll have a big year for us next year, and I think Gardy will too.
Joe, spring training 2015, one of the questions that you had to answer a lot was about Mark Teixeira, Alex Rodriguez. They're older ball players. What can you expect from them? They both produced. Well, now we're going to fast forward 2016. The same questions. What can you expect from those two guys?
Well, I think they both can be very productive and be in the middle of our order. I think Mark was having an MVP type of year. He was on pace for 40 and 120. And I think that this guy will be extremely productive. His leg is healing. Alex, I believe that he'll come prepared. He'll have a better idea what it takes to be the everyday DH, and he'll be productive as well.
With Alex being that everyday DH, you're kind of in a unique situation that you can't rotate that role as you had in maybe years past. With Beltran on the roster, with Mark Teixeira, who could possibly use days at times, how difficult does that make your job to kind of manage how to get those other guys off days?
Well, I think what it will allow us to do, I think with the depth, you know, with the Hicks, you can give one of the outfielders a day off instead of having to DH him. And, you know, maybe Alex plays 5 out of 7 games or 6 out of 7 games, and you give someone else that DH spot. I realize I can't play him every day, so we'll make that work.
You know, having said that, it seems like your job a little bit changes year to year, learning how to manage players a little better, which means you have to rotate players in. And I'm wondering, when it comes to some of the young guys that we saw last year, you'd put in a Mason Williams on a day, a Slade Heathcott, a Greg Bird. How wowed were you by what they did and how they contributed?
I was extremely impressed with what all our young kids did because they came up and they were productive. Mason Williams was playing well. Slade played very well. I mean, you think about the 3-run homer he hit in Tampa. He hadn't played a lot in the big leagues. I mean, these kids were very productive. Greg Bird was stepping in for an MVP type candidate and had 40 RBIs in the 2 months. So we're really impressed with our youth. And the one thing, you know, that it reminds me of, when the Yankees went on a long run and were very productive and had a lot of World Series titles, there was an influx of youth that came in with the veteran players. And I think these kids are going to be able to help us a lot.
So along those lines, and I mentioned sort of your job has changed, on a daily basis, you'd love to pencil in 9 guys, make it easy,
yeah.
right? But how much of a challenge is that now for you, knowing that a guy might need a day off? You got to pick the right young guy to put in there.
You know, I think what you do is you always try to look ahead. And the one thing I've realized from this game, it never goes according to plan, but you try to look ahead and say, you know, this is my plan to give you a day off on this day. And so you try to prepare your extra outfit. You're going to play this day, and this day. You're going to play 3 or 4 days in a row here. We're going to give guys days off. You do the same thing in the infield, and you try to give them, you know, times where you can maybe give them 2 days off in a sense, where you have a day off, and then you give them the next day, or you give them a day off, and then the next day's a day off, and you try to really refresh them.
Joe, I know the trade talk is Brian Cashman's area, but I have to ask you because you had that 2-headed security blanket last year,
yeah.
Betances and Miller at the end of
games. And
games.
I think it had 3 heads, actually.
Well, Andrew Miller's name has come up,
yeah.
and Brian has said, listen, I'd have to be overwhelmed to trade this guy. How nervous do you get to even think that an Andrew Miller wouldn't be there next season?
Yeah, well, I mean, these guys were, when you look at what Wilson, Betances, and Miller did, they were a big part of our success. And I really believe it was one of the biggest reasons why we got to the playoffs, because we won games we were supposed to. We didn't give games away late. And a lot of times they held it close, and then we took the lead, and then we won those games. So these guys are extremely important to us.
Joe, you talked a little bit about youth already, but is there anybody in the minors that you expect to come up and contribute that we haven't seen yet this season?
Well, I think that the next big name that has a chance to really make an impact is Gary Sanchez. I think that he has a chance to spell a Brian McCann a couple days a week, and then maybe you get Brian a DH day or that sort of thing, and really be productive.
When you get the reports from, let's say, the Arizona Fall League, and you hear that Gary Sanchez tore it up, and yeah, I mean, how confident does that make you? Knowing that John Ryan Murphy, in a way, was a terrific go-to guy behind McCann, that maybe you can go to Sanchez this year.
Well, I think it gives us a lot of reason to be optimistic about the catching in the future here. We think we have a player that has a ton of upside, that has power. And, you know, as Brian gets older, maybe he gets an extra day off here and there, and we can put in a guy that can be really productive. And the other guy that played really well last year in AAA was Austin Romine. I mean, I think he really put it together last year. So we feel that we have depth there.
Joe, when you look at the second base situation, Brian Cashman has said right now it's Ackley and Refsnyder.
Yes.
That's the way we're going unless something comes forward that I think is better. If it is Ackley and Refsnyder, how comfortable would you be with that?
Well, you know, I'd be comfortable. I mean, I think you have to see how they're both doing and how they're handling the position. But that's what we would go with and see how they did.
Did Refsnyder surprise you at all at the end of last season? Because you used him more and more as time went on.
He really did, because he didn't play for 3 weeks, you know, because we were in a spot where we were trying to give guys days off. We couldn't win those games that we needed to win. And he played for 3 weeks and was extremely productive. His at-bat in the playoff game were really good. His at-bats the last 5 or 6 days were really good. He did impress me.
All right, Joe, we've covered a lot of ground. You've probably got about 80 other things to do here, so we'll let you go. But thanks for joining us, as always.
Thanks for having me. Everyone looks good.